Chapter 12. Boone's Grave. Kelly got out of the car first. She stood staring at the old, weather-beaten gray cabins. She could hear the others getting out of the car behind her, hear the car doors closing. She could feel her friends coming up alongside her. No one said a word. The sun was down, but total darkness hadn't set in yet. The horseshoe of weather-beaten cabins hulked in the strange half-light. It was as if the buildings had the group surrounded. Kelly bowed her head. "This is the place?" Doug asked her. Kelly didn't know how she knew the place better, from the photos in her notebook or from her nightmares, but this was, oh yes, this was the place. She nodded slightly, put a hand over her mouth. She wanted to scream. All the time she'd been out to Boone's grave in Newkirk, she'd always felt that the place wasn't right. She hated the dainty flowers people sometimes left on his tombstone. She always brushed them off. She knew Boone wouldn't want them. This eerie old camp, this was Boone's real grave. "Hey, Jason!" Miguel yelled. He laughed. Come out, wherever you are!" The short, muscular boy picked up a stick and strode around happily, banging doors and wooden porch railings. "Looks deserted," he reported. "Duh," Tina said. "Just us chickens," Doug said, winking at Tina. "Alone in the dark." Kelly pressed both hands hard against her temples. She kept standing there while the others were laughing and joking. They were stretching, unwinding, exploring. A wave of dizziness passed over her. Why did she come back here? For a moment she couldn't remember. It was Boone who reminded her. He was sitting, she now saw, on the porch of Cabin 1, dangling his leather boots off the side. "You came up here to kill Jason," he told her with a familiar laugh. "Course, a lot of good that'll do me now," he cackled. "Just kidding." He flashed a jagged smile. "I'm glad you came, sis." He stood, wiped his hands on the thighs of his ragged jeans, then turned and disappeared into the darkness of the cabin door, raising his hands in a wave of goodbye. Kelly's chest was heaving. She wanted to scream his name, make him come back. She started running toward the cabin. "Kelly?" Doug called. "What the?" Tina began. The cabin was dark and smelled of mildew and wet wood. There were a few metal bunk beds, naked springs, no mattresses. The cabin was empty. Kelly stood in the darkness, breathing deeply. "Boone," she whispered. She could feel his presence, as if at any moment he might come up behind her and tap her on the shoulder. He didn't, though, and after a moment she walked back out onto the porch. The other three were all standing where she had left them, staring at her. "What gives, Kel?" Miguel called. Kelly had rehearsed the steps she would take tonight so many times. So many nights lying awake she'd gone over her plan, which was lucky. Even though she was in a daze, she knew exactly what she had to do. "Okay," she said. "We've got to set up, and we've got to move fast." "Think fast, Sanderson," Miguel said. He lunged at Doug, got him in a headlock, and started wrestling him down to the grass. Doug was laughing and yelling, trying to convince Miguel to let go. Kelly felt like letting Miguel continue, but there wasn't time. "Hey!" she yelled. "Miguel! Doug!" They stopped, staring at her, looking alarmed. "Guys," she went on, trying to keep her voice normal. "Listen up. I'm serious. We've got to get to work. I mean, our whole lives are at stake, okay? In case you want some motivation." Miguel let Doug go. He fell to the ground with a thud. Tina sat down, looking like a bored princess on the hood of the car. But at least they were listening. "We've got to dig the trap," Kelly said. Miguel hurried through the darkness toward the porch. He was rubbing his stubby hands together in excitement. "Time to do some monster hunting, huh?" "You betcha," Kelly grinned nervously. "This way." She jumped down off the porch and led Miguel over to the car. She popped the trunk of the Volvo and took out the 2 large shovels she had brought. She handed one to Miguel and held out the other to Doug, who was limping toward her. "This guy's a maniac," he complained. "I think he tore my leg off. Somebody look at it, will ya?" just to see if it's still attached. Kelly ignored him, handing him the shovel instead of answering. Miguel, Doug, I need you guys to start digging. Digging? Tina asked. She slid off the car hood and stood with one hand on her hip, looking annoyed. Yes, digging, Kelly said curtly. She handed out the flashlights. Here, it's going to get incredibly dark very soon, and there isn't any electricity around here, so keep these with you no matter where you go. Miguel jammed the handle of the flashlight into his back pocket. He hefted his shovel. What are we digging? The trap, Kelly said. Tina, there are some candles in the glove department, and here's a bag of old clothes. I want you to light the candles and put them in the window of... She surveyed the field. She pointed to the cabin in the exact center of the horseshoe. That cabin. Then take the clothes down to the lake, wet them, and hang them over the railing of the cabin to dry. Tina stared at her in the fading light. Come again? Just do what I tell you, Kelly said. Trying to force some gentleness back into her voice, she added, Please? Oh, she said the magic word, Doug told Tina, smiling lightly. He was resting two hands in his chin on the handle of his shovel. Tina didn't move. You mind telling us what this is all about? Yeah, Miguel asked eagerly. What's the plan? Okay, Kelly said. Here it is. We're going to make it look like we're staying in that cabin. She pointed at cabin 5. But we're not going to be there, see? We're going to be watching from these cabins on the sides. Me and Doug over there, you and Tina on that side. Why do we have to split up? Tina asked. Kelly knew Tina wouldn't like these sleeping arrangements, but she didn't have time to argue with her. Shut up, Tina, I'm serious. She said it casually, like it wasn't a big insult or anything. Still, Tina shut up. I want you guys to start digging, right? She led the way over to cabin 5, took a few last giant steps, stopped and pointed down. Right here. This is where we'll set up the trap. The hole doesn't have to be all that wide, but it has to be long. I want to be sure that if Jason walks toward the cabin, he'll hit it. She hooked her dirty blonde hair behind her ears on either side. Listen, I figure Jason will come for us tonight, but if we're ready for him, I'm sure this is going to work. The truth was, she was feeling anything but sure. She clapped her hands. Okay, let's get a move on. Far out, Miguel said. Then he started digging furiously, his muscular biceps knotting and clenching. He grunted with the effort. Kelly watched for a moment, feeling a surge of gratitude that this powerful guy had come along on the trip. Digging the hole was going to go fast with Miguel around. Sighing, Tina plodded back to the car and took the bag of laundry out of the trunk. Where's the lake? Follow that trail, Kelly called to her. You can't miss it. But if you run into trouble, start screaming. Even if you just start getting weird vibes. You know what I mean? Don't be afraid to holler. Gee, thanks, Tina said. Kelly watched her disappear into the thick forest. Doug was digging alongside Miguel now, though he wasn't digging anywhere near as hard. I'm going to get some branches to make into spikes, she told them. Then I'll come back and help you with the shoveling. You got it, babe, Miguel called, sending another thick cloud of dirt sailing over his head. Doug stopped shoveling, grinned, and waved. Kelly thought a moment. Then she went over to Doug. Here, she said. Maybe you better hold on to this while I'm gone. Doug stared down at the gun in horror. Is it loaded? What do you think? He took it gingerly. Kelly got her long hunting knife out of the car. The moon was already out, full and silver. Its haunted face stared down like the face of Jason's hockey mask in the few fuzzy photos in Kelly's notebook. Photos that skeptics claimed were fake. Kelly knew better. There was enough light shining off the moon and filtering down through the trees to make the 6-inch silver blade of Kelly's knife gleam. She gripped the handle hard. Don't worry, Boone, she said out loud. He's going to pay. Then she started out of the clearing, making her way into the woods. Hey, Kel! Miguel called just as she was leaving. What? This is really it, isn't it? Huh? Monster hunting! We're doing it! Yeah, she called back, trying to sound enthusiastic. Miguel was right. This was really it. The wooden house was dark and quiet as Bud Jr. and his wife drove up the grassy drive. "Looks like Dad got them to sleep all right," Bud Jr. told his wife with a proud smile. Earlier this evening, Buddy and his wife had argued whether it was safe to let his father mind the kids, even for a couple of hours. Looked like he'd been right to trust his dad, Buddy thought happily. Jessie took Buddy's hand as they strolled up the steps to the front door. That wasn't like her. A night away from the kids seemed to have done her a world of good. Jessie went in first. Buddy was putting the latch on the door when his wife gasped. He whirled. Through the archway into the living room he could see the liquor cabinet. It had been smashed open and toppled onto the floor. Husband and wife stared at each other for one shocked second. Then Jessie started racing up the front stairway. Buddy just stood where he was. He was moving toward the fallen liquor cabinet, his feet crunching over broken glass, when the screams came from upstairs. They were piercing, horrible screams that sounded as if his wife were vomiting up her insides. They were so loud. Chapter 13. The Night Shift. "How deep does she want this thing, anyway?" Miguel asked. He had been digging dutifully for an hour. Now he was sweating heavily, but still he was keeping up a steady rhythm. "Deep enough to bury us?" Doug said snidely. Tina was on the porch, draping the wet clothes over the railing. "That's no joke," she said. "I'm starting to get kind of scared." "That's 'cause you're a coward," Miguel said, "like all girls." "I'm not scared of monsters, you dweeb," Tina said. "I'm scared of Kelly. I mean, who knows what she's capable of?" Miguel and Doug both peered up at her from down in the hole. The candle she had set up in the windows threw a tiny flickering light across her thin, pretty face, catching the worry in her dark eyes. In the distance, an owl screeched. Or was it somebody's dying scream? Tina shivered. "Seriously, I think she's so stressed out, she could be planning a mass suicide or something. You know, a sacrifice in honor of her beloved Boone. Maybe she's really having us dig our own grave." "Maybe I am," Kelly said softly from the side of the porch. Tina screamed. "Hey!" she snapped. "I told you in the car. Stop trying to scare me." Miguel chuckled happily. "She got you again!" "I mean it," Tina said to Kelly, shaking her finger like a schoolteacher. "Don't you ever do that again." "Well, don't accuse me of being a killer again," Kelly said, "and then we'll talk." The tall girl stepped out of the shadows. She was stooped over. She was carrying a whole bundle of thick branches, balancing them across the back of her neck. She tilted to the side, dumping the load of wood on the ground. Miguel climbed out of the hole to help her. "These are the stakes?" he asked. "Yeah." Kelly knelt down to inspect the hole. The two had dug down deep, so deep that Doug was in the hole and Kelly, who was kneeling outside it, were face to face. "This is great," Kelly said, her gray-blue eyes gleaming in the darkness. "This is great." "Glad you like it," Doug said. "I think my back is broken." Kelly smiled. "Yeah? Well, it's going to be worth it, because it's going to slice Jason to pieces. Come on, give me a hand." "Oh, goody, more work for Doug," Doug said, but he took the long branches from her as she handed them down. Kelly found a boulder which Miguel used to hammer the stakes into the hole. Then she gave Doug her knife. Miguel had a pocket knife. She told them both to whittle the tops of the stakes into sharp points. She really wanted to do that task herself. She'd dreamed of it every time she'd whittled a piece of wood this year. Dreamed of knowing that with each cut of the knife she was carving out Jason's death. But there wasn't time. Instead, she took Tina back into the woods to gather some long, thin saplings. These they used to weave a lattice-work cover over the trap. On top they tossed leaves and then dirt. When they were done, the four all stood around the trap admiring their handiwork. "It's really pretty good," Tina said, sounding surprisingly proud. "I mean, you'd never know it was there." "Especially in the dark," Doug agreed. "My luck, I'll have to take a piss in the middle of the night, and I'll forget, and then I'll be the one who falls into this thing. Or maybe I'll push him in, Miguel said, shoving Doug toward the hole. Doug spun out of his grasp. Miguel, he said, you're cruising for a bruising, you know that? Oh, right, Miguel said, laughing. And what are you going to do to me, huh, big man? Miguel waved his hands in the air, karate style, but Doug just moved away. Guys, we're not done yet, Kelly said. The group froze, staring at her in disbelief. Kelly waved at the huge piles of dirt they had dug out. This dirt is a dead giveaway. We've got to move it in back of the cabin. Doug pretended to faint. Tina groaned. But within minutes they were back at work, carrying shovelfuls of dirt around behind the cabin. It took another hour. By then they were all exhausted and grimy and sweaty. Now what? Miguel asked Kelly. Let me guess, Tina said. We run 100 miles around the lake really fast? Kelly clenched her hands, feeling the sweat on her palms. Nope, she said grimly. Now we wait. Kelly insisted on taking the first shift. So did Miguel. The four all set up their sleeping bags in cabins on opposite sides of the trap. Then they met in the middle of the clearing for one last pep talk from Kelly. As her friends gathered close around her, she flashed on a memory of Boone. All the little kids in the neighborhood used to worship her older brother. Boone could make anything fun. And wherever he was, it always seemed like the center of the universe. Sometimes he'd organize these massive touch football games. He was always the quarterback, and the little kids' favorite part was the huddle. They'd cluster around Boone, all trying to get as close to him as possible, and he'd give each kid a silly assignment that would make them laugh. You, Herbie, you go long, jump up and down, and stick your finger up your nose. It was the looks on her friends' faces, eyeing her in the darkness, that brought this memory back to Kelly. As much as the group had pooh-poohed this whole trip, she could tell they were all beginning to take it more seriously now that darkness was here. They wanted to be told what to do. We'll do 3-hour shifts, she said quietly. That way there's always going to be 2 people awake. So if someone falls asleep, the other person can wake them up. When Jason comes, try not to make a sound until he's in the trap. Then shout your head off. But guys, the most important thing of all is, we gotta have somebody awake at all times. That trap is deadly. If we're not totally careful, some innocent person could fall into it. We gotta keep that in mind. They all clasped hands in the darkness, a group handshake. Then they took their positions. An hour later, the candles in the window of cabin 5 were still flickering. They gave the cabin the look of a huge, creepy jack-o'-lantern, with the windows for eyes and the dark open doorway for a mouth. All the time, the sound of the transistor radio Kelly had set up in the cabin kept playing its tiny music. She kept catching snatches of songs. Love you to death till the day we die, you're tearing me apart, were some of the lyrics. It was true what they said. The songs on the radio always seemed to be about whatever it was that was happening to you. Gun in hand, Kelly was sitting with her back against the cabin wall, her face a few feet back from the open window. Occasionally she caught glimpses of Miguel moving around behind his window post. She had given him her knife. Tina had insisted on sleeping in the cabin next to his, not in the same one, despite Miguel's pleading. And Tina's refusal had pissed Miguel off royally. Not that Tina ever slept in the same room with him back at the house, but apparently he felt things should be different out here in the woods. Miguel had often bragged to Doug about how great Tina had been in the sack, and other typical macho man stuff. But Tina told Kelly that she and Miguel had made out, and that was it. As much as she liked Miguel, Kelly had to believe Tina. A twig snapped. Kelly sat up straight, her entire body instantly rigid and alert. But she didn't hear another sound, and eventually her body relaxed again. She turned to look at Doug, who had set up their 2 sleeping bags right in the middle of the floor, and was using a bunch of rolled-up shirts as a pillow. It was a hot night. Doug had stripped down to his jockey shorts and was sleeping on top of his sleeping bag. He had left his shoes and socks on. He was also snoring, something Doug always insisted he never did. Doug was like that. As good-looking as he was still very vain and sensitive about certain things. Kelly felt another wave of gratitude that he was here. Looking at his lanky body, so graceful even in sleep, she forgave him completely for flirting with that waitress. After all, she hadn't been the easiest girlfriend to get along with this year. For instance, Doug had not exactly gone to bed happy tonight. He had made another pass at her, and they had replayed their scene from earlier in the alley, with Doug getting even more frustrated than angry this time. "Unbelievable, right, Boone?" she now asked softly, her lips barely moving. "Like I'm going to be making out when Jason comes," she chuckled quietly. "That'd be one way to make him mad, now wouldn't it? Since that's why he drowned in the first place. Funny, huh?" Was it the wind, or did the trees in the surrounding woods seem to shake their leaves in a whispery "yes"? Kelly glanced down at her watch, holding the face up close to her eyes. Almost 3. She should probably wake up Doug soon. Her eyelids felt so heavy. Kelly and Boone on the lake in a rowboat. So peaceful. Suddenly Jason rose up out of the water, screaming, knife held high. Kelly awoke with a start, her eyes wide. She had fallen asleep just like that. She was so tired that falling asleep was the easiest thing in the world. All she had to do was let go, and it was as if she were plummeting down into this dark pit. It was horrible the way her nightmares were waiting for her down there. Propping her eyes open with her fingers, she watched the woods for a few moments more. Then, "Miguel!" She leaned forward and hissed out the window. He stuck his head out as well. There was enough moonlight for Kelly to see that he had put on a headband and smeared his cheeks with mud-like war paint. What a crazy man. But just the kind of crazy man she wanted to have around right now. "You seen anything?" "No. You?" She shook her head. "Listen, I think we should wake up Doug and Tina for the next shift. I'm fading fast. What do you say?" "You're the boss." "Okay, wake her up." Miguel grinned and waved, then disappeared into the shadows again. A moment later he emerged from the darkness of the doorway and headed for the next cabin. Kelly stood with a groan, her joints all cold and stiff from sitting on the damp wooden floor for so many hours. She knelt beside Doug. She reached down to wiggle his left sneaker. His foot came off in her hand. Chapter 14. Alone at last. She fell on Doug, shaking him roughly. What?" he cried. "Hey! Get that sneaker out of my face!" It was only then that Kelly saw what she was holding. Doug had taken off his sneakers, kicking them off at the foot of the makeshift bed. He had left the socks in the shoes. Kelly collapsed face first onto the sleeping bag next to Doug. "Oh, God!" she groaned. The groan was partly out of relief that Doug was okay, and partly because the floor under the sleeping bag was very hard. "You're not wired now, are you?" Doug asked. He rolled over and put his arm around her, kissing her ear. "Did you catch lots of monsters while I was sleeping?" "Doug," she said, "stop it." "Stop what?" "That," she said, pushing his hand away. "Come on," she said. "I'm going to be asleep any second. You've got to do your guard duty. I left the gun on the windowsill." "Right," he said with a sigh. "After all, those trees out there wouldn't know how to stand up straight unless we watched them all night." "Please," she mumbled. She heard him grumbling, felt him getting to his feet. It was the last thing she remembered. As Doug took his place at the window, Kelly started snoring. He turned and smiled at her. Here she was always claiming he was the noisy one, and whenever she slept, she was always buzzing away like a chainsaw. He never told her, though. The poor girl had enough on her mind. Outside in the clearing, Miguel was coming out of Tina's cabin. He waved to Doug, who waved back. Miguel rubbed his eyes, miming how sleepy he was. Then he disappeared inside his cabin. A moment later, Tina appeared in the window of her cabin. She waved to Doug as well. Doug blew a kiss. She blew one back. So Doug blew 2 kisses. Then he started beaming his flashlight into her window. "Come on," he told himself. "Don't get yourself into trouble." He kept telling himself that for almost 15 minutes. All the time he could see Tina, her long black hair, her thin pretty face, framed in the cabin window like a picture. Doug sighed. He knew when he was licked. Leaving the gun and flashlight on the windowsill, he quietly tiptoed out of the cabin. He signaled to Tina. She met him in the middle of the clearing. He watched her come, thinking that the girl had the most amazing figure. A dark, exotic beauty, no doubt about it. "What's up?" she asked, trying to look bored but looking excited nevertheless. "Can you believe how stupid this is?" he whispered. She shook her head no, which meant that her waist-long hair swished from side to side like a tail. "I don't think I can stay up all night," he told her. "Me neither." They were eyeing each other in the darkness. She was smiling. Is she thinking the same thing I'm thinking? Doug wondered. "Want to go for a walk?" he asked casually. "Somewhere we can, talk." By way of an answer, her smile broadened. Damn! She was thinking exactly the same thing he was thinking. There were a number of trails leading off from the main circle of cabins. Doug chose one almost at random. The woods were thick. There were brambles and vines that kept pushing into their faces. Doug kept reaching out his hand to help Tina across the fallen piles of branches, even when the piles were slight and she didn't need a hand. In fact, he took every possible opportunity to put his hands on her, hoisting her over boulders, guiding her around trees. And then one time, after helping her across a tiny stream, he didn't let go of her hand. She didn't pull her hand away either. Doug's heart was beating like crazy. It wasn't like he had never been unfaithful to Kelly. Almost every time she went off into the woods, he got back together with his ex-girlfriend Lisa, just to name one example. But with Kelly sleeping only a couple of 100 yards away, that would be a new trick. Well, it was her own fault. The way she'd been pushing him away lately. He was only human after all, and Tina was just so incredibly hot. He only lasted a few yards holding Tina's hand. Suddenly, he pulled her up against the wide trunk of a tall tree. He could barely make out her face until his own face was inches from hers. Her dark eyes were so serious and yet welcoming. He kissed her hard. He went on kissing her until he had to pull away, gasping for air. "Oh, man," he said, "this is wrong." Her answer took away the little breath he had left. "Why?" she asked calmly. "Why?" He had to laugh. "Because of Kelly," he said. But then she pulled him back to her. He didn't resist. She was kissing his neck, his ear. "Don't tell me you're really serious about her," she murmured in between kisses. He pulled back. "I am," he said. He felt like he had to say it, even though his heart wasn't in it. She just laughed. "Look," he said, "I've never cheated on her before." Tina was guffawing. "Well, anyways, I've never messed around while she's around, okay?" "She's not around," Tina said, and then she yanked him roughly back to the tree. She was so passionate, like some kind of animal. She was chewing on his bottom lip. "Wow," he said, "you're really wild, you know that?" "Only with you." She slid her hands up under his t-shirt. He felt her long nails rake across his back, and he made a mental note to keep his shirt on tomorrow around Kelly. "Really?" he said. He was amused and a little curious. "You're not, like this? You're not like this with Miguel?" "Are you kidding? All I ever do with him is run away. I can't get rid of him." "Ah." He couldn't fight it any longer. Doug put one hand over his head, resting it on the trunk of the tree as he relaxed into the next kiss. Then he realized what his hand was holding. He pulled back again. "What's wrong?" Tina asked. "Nothing," Doug said. He looked up and up. "In fact, I think we're in business." Tina looked up as well. Just over her head, Doug was holding on to a wooden rung that had been nailed into the tree trunk. Above that rung was another, and another, leading up into the bushy leaves of the tree. Just visible high above them was the plywood floor of a big tree house. "Want to come upstairs?" Doug asked suavely. Tina giggled. "Maybe. You got something to drink up there?" "Sure. There's my dad's bar, plus cable, HBO, and hey, I almost forgot. I picked up the new Spin Doctors CD. I want you to listen to it." "I hate the Spin Doctors." "Oh, well, I'm sure there's something up there you'll like." He knitted his hands together to give her a boost. "After you," he said. He hoisted her up, enjoying the view as her lithe body clambered up the tree, going right past his nose. He climbed up after her, reaching up now and then to swipe playfully at her fanny. The treehouse was vast, damp, and utterly dark. There seemed to be some empty liquor bottles scattered around and plenty of cobwebs. Doug was sure Tina would complain about the clammy odor. But instead, as soon as they had both climbed all the way up, she wrapped her thin arms around his neck and drew him down on top of her. "I love the way you fixed up your house," she murmured. "Wait till I show you the jacuzzi." All around them was the smell of fresh pine and wood and sap. The tree was swaying slightly, the leaves rustling gently in the breeze, as if trying to fan the young lovers. Their kisses grew hot and heavy. "Oh, God," Tina said, "I hate to say this, but you make Miguel seem like a child." "Oh, yeah? He's not a good kisser?" "Are you kidding?" Tina snickered. "I'm sorry, but he is the worst. He doesn't kiss, he slobbers. And he always has bad breath, like sour cream and onion potato chips that have gone all rancid. Ugh." "Tell me about it. It's so... Say, did you just hear something?" Doug propped himself up on an elbow and listened. "No." He smiled down at her archly. "Now where was I?" "Here," said Tina. She giggled. "And here. And here." Suddenly, Tina pushed him away from him. "I heard it again," she said. "Heard what?" "I don't know. Like footsteps, like someone's climbing up the tree." "Tina?" "What?" "Don't tell me you're going to get all paranoid on me like Kelly is." "I'm not getting paranoid. I'm sure I..." "Tina, let me put it to you this way. Our time alone tonight is precious. Pretty soon, we've got to go back to camp. And in case one of those two nutcases wakes up and finds us missing, think about it. Now, do you really want to waste some of our precious seconds on me, going down to check if there's someone climbing up the treehouse?" "Well, no, but..." "Good." He silenced all further objections with his next kiss. At least, he silenced her until he heard the footsteps. "Jesus," he whispered. He moved fast now, crawling toward the open hole around the tree's wide trunk. He moved even faster after he looked down the hole. It was dark, but not dark enough that he couldn't see the bald head of the huge man climbing toward him. Chapter 15. Don't Breathe a Word. Whimpering softly, Big Red climbed all the way up into the treehouse. Pa and Tuck and Bud had built this treehouse years ago. They told Ma they were building it for Big Red. Instead, they used it for afternoon naps when they were really drunk. And they told Big Red he couldn't use it at all. Well, there was no way they would find out now. Big Red thought he heard something scurrying back into the shadows as he came up into the house. Probably squirrels or something. He sat there, hands over his mask, blubbering like a 2-year-old. He just felt so awful for what he had done to Ma and Pa, Tuck, and Bud. But most of all, he felt bad about those little kids. He had killed their grandfather. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm sorry." After he had killed Bud, he was still in a rage. And the next thing he knew, it was like his artificial leg took on a life of its own. Big Red stuck the liquor bottle he was holding up to the hole in his mask and tilted his head back. He had taken 3 bottles from Buddy's house. This one was all that was left. At first, Big Red wanted to smash all the bottles in Buddy's house, spill out all the liquor that had caused so much pain and trouble through the years. But then he thought it might make him feel better if he drank some. It hadn't worked. He kept seeing those awful pictures from Buddy's house, like the new dollhouse Uncle Bud was working on down in his son's workshop. After Big Red had gotten so angry, he'd use the cabin chainsaw on Uncle Bud. Then he'd wedge Bud's head into the dollhouse. It looked so creepy sitting there. Uncle Bud's eyes kept staring right out the dollhouse windows. Big Red belched loudly. He had already drunk enough liquor to kill a smaller man, but Big Red was huge. Still, the treehouse seemed to be spinning wildly all around him, and his stomach felt like it was spinning wildly in the opposite direction. He sucked the last liquor from the bottle, then dropped it to the floor with a loud clunk. He felt like he was going to throw up. He lowered his head to the floor, mouth open, ready to chuck his cookies. Instead, he fell forward, his face smacking hard against the floor. The hard white mask protected him against the fall, but Big Red was out cold. Doug tugged on Tina's hand. Her hand was like ice. He had to tug several times before she started inching forward out of the shadows toward the wooden rung ladder in the center of the treehouse. They didn't dare so much as whisper to each other until they were 30 or 40 yards away from the tree. "Doug," Tina said, her eyes wide, "who was that?" "Some drunk." "God, I was terrified. Listen, you don't think that guy could have anything to do with what Kelly was—" Doug was ready for this. He held up a hand like a traffic cop. "No way." "Well, at least we should tell her. I mean, God, we—" Doug grabbed her by the shoulders. "Listen to me, Tina. It was just some old wino, okay? It has nothing to do with us. And if we breathe a word to Kelly, we're going to have to explain what we were doing up there. Think about that, would you?" "You're hurting me." Sorry, come on." He started back through the woods toward camp, pulling her along behind him. He didn't tell her that he thought he caught a glimpse of the huge guy's face and that he seemed to be wearing a white mask. For God's sake, thought Doug, why bring that up? Anyway, he assured himself, it was so dark in there. Must have been his imagination. Yeah, just his imagination. Chapter 16. The Apache Scout Nest. "What you doing, digging another trap?" Kelly squinted up into the sunlight. Miguel was standing at the edge of the shallow hole she was digging. He was wearing a hunter-style blue plaid vest over his bare chest, gym shorts, and sneakers. His powerful arms were crossed. Kelly returned to digging. "Nope," she said. "This is an Apache scout nest." A happy smile appeared on Miguel's bulldog face. He knew he was going to like this. "Was that?" "Well," Kelly sent a spadeful of black dirt flying past Miguel's sneakers, "I can only tell you what Boone told me." "It's probably bull, then," Miguel said amiably. Kelly froze. It was true about Boone. He loved to make things up, but it made her blood boil when anyone said anything bad about him. She just stood there glaring until Miguel prompted her. "What did he say?" "Boone said that back when the cowboys were fighting the Indians, they used to chase these Indians through the woods, and then—" Kelly snapped her fingers. "Just like that, the Indians would disappear." "Yeah?" Miguel grinned and twisted his wispy mustache. He was obviously hooked. "Cool." How'd they do that?" "Well, the cowboys never figured it out, but this was how. Those branches over there, that's going to be the cover for the nest. The scout would throw himself down into this hole and pull the top down over him like a hatch door. The cowboys could be standing right on top of the Indian and not know he was there." Miguel whistled, and for a second she thought about telling him the really big news. If he thought an Apache scout nest was cool, how would he react to the news that Boone had come by this morning to watch her dig? Boone had told her that Jason wouldn't come for them till nightfall. No, thought Kelly, this piece of information she'd better keep to herself. "Way cool, Kel," Miguel said, bending down to study the nest. He grinned. "Good morning, by the way." "Morning." She grinned up at him. She really was fond of old Miguel. "You sleep okay?" Miguel frowned. "Yeah, sure." Kelly didn't press him for more details. He was probably upset about the way he had had to sleep, namely alone. "Here," she said, "try it out." She got out of the nest and waited until Miguel lay down inside. Then she pulled the trapdoor of branches and leaves down on top of him. Just like that, he disappeared totally into the leafy floor of the forest. She pulled open the hatch. "Perfect," she said. "Okay," Miguel said. "Let me see how fast I can do it." He paced back into the woods, got a running start, then threw himself down into the hole and pulled the hatch down. Then the hatch opened. Miguel sat up grinning proudly, like a corpse happy to be getting out of his coffin. "How was that?" "Perfect." Kelly reached down and they high-fived. "Listen," she told him, her tone turning serious. "If you get into trouble tonight, any time, don't forget this is here, okay? If Jason follows you, try to lead him past this spot. If you get enough of a lead, it could save your life." "Right," Miguel sneered. He stood up and started angrily dusting himself off. "What's the matter?" Kelly asked. "Nothing." "Miguel, what?" "Nothing, Kelly. It's just, you had me really geared up for last night, you know. I was up almost the whole night." This was an exaggeration. Miguel had fallen asleep 1 minute after Kelly. "And for what, Kel?" "Don't worry," Kelly said. "He'll be here." "Yeah? When?" As if on cue, there were loud, piercing cries from the campsite. Okay, this has been chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 of Friday the 13th, Jason's Curse by Eric Morse. I'm using a new microphone today. Please let me know in the comments section if I sound a little clearer than normal, and if I need to make any adjustments at all, just please let me know. Also, I'm trying out some more music from the Friday the 13th films in the background. I'd like to get feedback on that as well if you guys don't mind. I had actually planned on doing more chapters than this tonight, but everywhere around where I live, people are blowing up firecrackers, even though 4th of July was yesterday, so I'm having to stop constantly to wait for them to get through a few big ones, you know, the big booming noise. I do apologize if you hear any in the background at all during the narration tonight. I tried my hardest to keep it out of there. Also, I'm enjoying this book very much so far, and Big Red's struggle against Jason's power is really interesting. I'm really digging that. The guy in the first book just was taken over completely, but Big Red seems to really be fighting against it, even though he's still losing when it comes to killing people. So yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of this book. We've only got a couple uploads to go until we're finished with this one. So let me know what you guys think so far, and I'll see you next time. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and whatever you do, don't click the thumbs down, because
it's got a death curse! Hey! This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morse, and you are listening to 80s Slasher Librarian's narration of my book, Friday the 13th, Jason's Curse. Enjoy.